It was supposed to be a simple visit to a local gallery, an event to please Alice. She loved art, had always been drawn to its intricate meanings, and the idea of experiencing it together seemed perfect. I never expected the turn of events that would come to change everything. That night, as I wandered through the crowded halls, I found myself in front of a painting that struck me deeply. It wasn't the colors, the brushwork, or the theme that got to me. It was the woman in the painting, Alice. Her form was unmistakable, her beauty undeniable, but it was the context that froze me. She was naked, cradled in the arms of another man, her eyes closed in ecstasy. The painting was titled Alice in Verona. I blinked, thinking for a moment that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there she was, captured forever in a moment I wasn't a part of, in a name that wasn't mine. I stood there for what felt like hours, pretending not to feel the surge of anger and confusion rising in my chest. I could feel my heart rate picking up, my fingers tightening into fists as I tried to control the reaction I was fighting to suppress. I kept my face neutral, as I knew how to do so well, and silently made my way out of the room, trying to shake off the feeling that had overtaken me. But inside, I was shattered. I went home that night to Alice. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her usual glass of wine, reading a book. I smiled, kissed her lightly on the cheek, and pretended nothing was amiss. The evening proceeded like any other. Dinner, laughter, shared stories about our day. But all the while, I couldn't stop replaying the image of her, naked, with another man. How had I not noticed? How could she betray me like this? My mind raced, but I buried it beneath a mask of calm. The last thing I wanted was to confront her without knowing the truth. The truth about what had happened between her and this stranger. And so, I did what any man in my position would do. I decided to investigate. I kept my suspicions to myself for weeks. I knew I needed evidence. I had to be sure before I did anything. Alice had always been emotionally balanced, the kind of woman everyone envied. And I had always been the cold, calculated surgeon, distant, but attentive. People thought we were perfect together. How could I have missed this? To answer that, I needed more than just my suspicions. I turned to someone I could trust, my brother. He wasn't just my brother. He was a former private investigator, someone with a knack for finding answers in places most people would overlook. Over beers in the dimly lit bar he owned, I explained what I had seen. His eyes widened, but he didn't question me. He just nodded, silently accepting the task ahead. We would dig into Alice's life, find out what was really going on behind the facade she had built. As he began his investigation, I couldn't help but wonder how deep the rabbit hole went. Would the man in the painting be the only secret? Or were there more hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Little did I know, this would only be the beginning. A descent into a world I had never imagined. A world of lies, deceit, and betrayal. And at the heart of it all, a woman I thought I knew. The story would unfold, but it wouldn't stop there. Not by a long shot. The investigation started slowly. My brother, Nate, was meticulous in his methods, and after a few days of discreet inquiries, he discovered something unsettling. Alice had been seeing someone. An artist named Roman Willard, whose work had often been featured in local galleries. He was known for his avant-garde pieces, works that blurred the line between art and life. At first, it seemed innocent enough, a professional connection. Alice had always surrounded herself with artists, curators, and scholars, people who were as passionate about history and beauty as she was. But as the weeks went by, Nate's digging revealed more. Alice and Roman had a history that stretched back much farther than I had imagined, and their meetings, their late-night conversations, went beyond the casual exchange of ideas. It was not just their professional relationship that tied them together, but something darker, something hidden beneath the layers of their interaction. Alice had been meeting Roman regularly, but not in the open spaces of the gallery or the light of day. No, they had found their meeting place in the shadows, in a secluded studio beneath the museum where Alice worked. The studio was located in what was once an old traffic light bunker, a disused, forgotten part of the building. It was a place where the outside world seemed to disappear, a world of hidden things. And as Nate uncovered more, I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. They had been meeting there for almost 2 years, slipping away in the dead of night while I was none the wiser, their whispered conversations and stolen moments a far cry from the pristine image of the marriage I thought we shared. But it wasn't just the studio. As Nate continued to piece things together, he uncovered something even more disturbing. Alice and Roman didn't just meet in the sterile confines of a forgotten bunker. They had shared their passion in places that made my stomach churn. Their secret meetings had led them to some of the darkest corners of the museum itself, places that no one would ever expect. The morgue, where the museum kept bodies for anatomical displays, had become their secret haven. The thought of my wife, the woman I had trusted, in such a macabre place, sharing herself with another man, it turned my stomach. That was the moment I realized the betrayal wasn't just physical. It was a profound violation, a breaking of everything we had built together. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I saw Alice, her sweet smile, the warmth in her voice, I knew it was all a lie. The woman who had shared her life with me was the same woman who had spent countless hours with Roman, her body entwined with his in that cold, sterile room. I began to see her differently, as though I had never truly known her at all. The morgue, of all places, had become the symbol of their betrayal. It was a place where death lingered in the air, where everything was supposed to be lifeless and still. But it was in that very place that Alice's passion had been reignited, and where she had chosen to be with someone else. It all felt like a slow, suffocating unraveling. I had been living a lie, and the image of Alice in that painting, naked and vulnerable in the arms of another man, was just the tip of the iceberg. The more I learned, the more I saw the cracks in our marriage, the cracks I had once believed were just imperfections in an otherwise perfect relationship. But now, everything was different. My trust in Alice had shattered, and the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface was starting to boil over. But I couldn't confront her yet, not without proof. I had to know for sure. I was a surgeon, and I knew how to cut things out, how to separate what was healthy from what was diseased. And Alice's betrayal? It was the infection, the thing that had spread through everything we had built. I couldn't just let it slide. No, I would confront her, but first, I needed the final piece of the puzzle. The truth about Roman. The truth about the child. And when I had that, I would decide what to do next. It wasn't long before I got the confirmation I needed, though not in the way I had hoped. The news about Alice and Roman had already taken root in my mind, gnawing at me, turning my thoughts into a twisted labyrinth. I was consumed by it, by the image of her in that painting, by the knowledge of her secret meetings with him, by the sense that everything I thought I knew was false. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. A whisper at the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest. Alice was pregnant. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she had been unfaithful, but maybe the child was mine. Maybe this was all just a mistake, an unfortunate series of events that we could somehow fix. But as I watched her, with her subtle changes in behavior, the small hints of a new life inside her, I knew deep down that nothing about this situation was simple or innocent. So, I made the decision. I wasn't going to confront Alice just yet, not without being absolutely sure. If she was carrying someone else's child, if Roman's blood ran through her veins instead of mine, then everything would change. I couldn't ignore that possibility. I had to know. But I couldn't ask her directly, not without risking everything, her trust, her love, and the fragile shell of the life we had built. Instead, I came up with a plan. I told Alice that there was a surprise waiting for her, a trip I had planned to a medical convention in Seattle. She seemed excited about it. She was always good at pretending, just as I was. I told her it was a romantic getaway, a break from our busy lives. But in truth, it was a carefully calculated move. While she thought we were attending talks and lectures, I had arranged for a routine checkup, a simple procedure that I had convinced her was necessary for the well-being of the pregnancy. It was a lie, of course, but I needed the truth, and this was the only way to get it. Under the guise of a routine amniocentesis, a test I had convinced her was just a precautionary measure, I had planned to run a fetal DNA analysis. The doctors at the Seattle hospital had no idea what I was truly after. They were just going to do what I told them, to run the test as part of the standard protocol. Alice, of course, trusted me completely. She had no reason not to. She had no idea that I was using my knowledge, my access to medical resources, to check for one thing and one thing only, whether the child she was carrying was mine or Roman's. The procedure went as planned, the sterile room, the cold metal instruments, the silence that filled the air except for the soft sounds of the machines. I watched Alice, her face calm, her eyes closed as she laid back, unaware of the betrayal I was orchestrating in the very place that should have been filled with trust. I was a surgeon, trained to cut through the human body, to repair and restore. But what I was doing now was something different. I wasn't healing. I was unraveling. I was digging into the very core of our lives, looking for the rotten parts that needed to be removed. A few days later, the results came back. I didn't need to look at the paper in front of me to know what it said. I already knew. The baby wasn't mine. The cold, sterile words on the page confirmed what I had suspected. Roman's blood ran through that child's veins. Alice's betrayal was not just an emotional one. It was a physical one that had left me with nothing but ashes in my hands. There was no coming back from this. But I didn't say a word to her. Not yet. I had to wait. I had to keep up the charade for just a little longer. I was a surgeon, after all, and a surgeon doesn't make impulsive decisions. A surgeon knows when to cut, when to heal, and when to let things fester just a little longer before making the incision. I could have confronted her then and there, but that wouldn't have been enough. I wanted more than just the satisfaction of exposing her lies. I wanted to make her understand the depths of her betrayal. I wanted to make Roman pay for what he had done to me, to us. And that, I realized, would be my true revenge. So I kept my silence. I smiled at her, kissed her forehead as if everything were still normal. But inside, I was cold. I was calculating. I had already begun planning the next step. And the first thing I needed to do was make sure that Roman paid for what he had done. I would destroy him, just as he had destroyed me. This wasn't about physical revenge. No, it was about something far more fitting. I would use my skills as a surgeon to exact my revenge. I would cut out the infection that had wormed its way into my life, slowly, quietly, and with great precision. Roman had no idea what was coming, and neither did Alice. Revenge is a strange thing. It can take many forms, and sometimes it doesn't require brute force or loud confrontations. Sometimes, the most effective revenge is the quiet, calculated kind, the kind that creeps in, unnoticed at first, until it has already done its damage. I had decided that I wouldn't confront Alice directly. That would be too simple, too obvious. No, I would make her feel the pain of betrayal, but through a different avenue. Roman was the one who had to suffer. He was the one who had stolen from me, and I would make sure he understood that actions have consequences, that his involvement with Alice was not going to go unpunished. My first step was to get close to him, to gain his trust in a way that only someone with my background could. I knew Roman was a man who, like many artists, was prone to vanity. He had a fragile ego, always eager to seek attention for his work, and always searching for ways to elevate his status in the eyes of others. It was this vanity that would be his downfall. I devised a plan that would seem like a generous gesture, an invitation to help him, a way to both flatter him and get him into my grasp without him suspecting a thing. I invited Roman to a charity event that I had arranged, a free plastic surgery program for those in need, something that would make a positive impact on the community. The perfect ruse. Roman had recently injured his knee, an accident that occurred while he was hiking with some friends. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it had been bothering him, and I knew he would jump at the chance for free surgery, especially from someone as well-regarded as me. He accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, flattered by the prospect of being treated by a successful surgeon. He had no idea that I had ulterior motives, no idea that I was going to be the one to introduce him to a different kind of pain, one that wouldn't heal with a simple operation. When Roman arrived at the clinic, I greeted him with warmth, the practiced professionalism I had perfected over the years. I made him feel comfortable, putting him at ease as we went through the pre-surgery assessments. He was eager, gushing about his artwork and his relationship with Alice, bragging about their late-night conversations and their shared passion for creativity. I listened, of course, nodding at all the right moments, but inside, I was planning. I had already prepared the surgical room. Roman's knee would be fixed, but the real work would happen after that. As I administered the anesthesia, I kept my movements smooth, methodical, pretending to be fully focused on the procedure. The knee surgery itself was routine, nothing out of the ordinary, but as I worked, I began to carry out my real plan. I had implanted a microchip in his thigh, a small device that would slowly begin to deteriorate his health. It wasn't an instant thing. At first, he wouldn't even notice. But over time, the infection would spread, slowly, insidiously. His body would start to reject the chip, causing his health to deteriorate in ways that were difficult to trace. First, his vision would blur. Then his hearing would fade. His body would slowly fail him in ways that made no sense, leaving him confused, scared, and entirely at the mercy of the consequences of his own actions. I didn't want to kill him. That wasn't the point. What I wanted was to make him suffer in a way that felt personal, in a way that mirrored the slow unraveling of trust in my marriage. The infection wouldn't be visible at first, just like the cracks in my relationship with Alice weren't visible at the start. But eventually, it would take its toll. And when it did, Roman would feel it in his bones, literally. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as his condition worsened. He couldn't explain what was happening. His doctors had no answers. And though his world was falling apart, he had no idea who was behind it. Meanwhile, I was making my own preparations. I had bought every painting that Roman had ever made of Alice. Every piece that had captured her likeness, every moment he had stolen from our life, I now owned. It was strange collecting them. At first, I didn't know what I would do with them, but as time passed, the idea began to take shape. I would use them, turn them into something that no one could ignore. I began planning an exhibition, a public unveiling that would showcase his work, but more importantly, it would expose the true nature of his relationship with Alice. The exhibition would be called Exposed, and it would take place at the same museum where Alice had worked for so many years. It would be a statement, a declaration of everything that had been hidden in the dark. The night of the opening arrived, and I stood before the crowd, my calm demeanor betraying nothing of the storm that raged inside me. Alice was there, of course, though she didn't know what was coming. She thought this was just a celebration of art, of Roman's work. She had no idea that I had orchestrated every part of this. As I began my speech, I could see the confusion in her eyes, the uncertainty that flickered in her expression. I talked about the paintings, about the art, but then I shifted gears. I revealed the truth about their relationship, about the lies, and the betrayal. I held up the DNA analysis, the test that proved the child wasn't mine. I talked about the surgery I had performed on Roman, how I had used my profession to make him suffer, to make him pay. The room fell silent as I detailed everything, leaving no room for doubt or escape. And then, with all eyes on me, I ended my speech with a simple, cold statement. I am a surgeon. I cut out everything that is rotten. So today, I am without you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and for the first time, I saw Alice's mask crack. She left that night, running from the life we had shared, from the man she had betrayed. And with her, she took everything, the trust, the child, her job. I had cut her out of my life, and though it felt like a hollow victory, there was a strange sense of finality. Roman, on the other hand, didn't escape so easily. After weeks of suffering, he recorded a video message confessing that he had never truly loved Alice. He admitted that their relationship had been nothing more than a series of provocations for an exhibition he had planned in Europe. He had used her as a tool, as art, just as I had used him to make my point. His words rang hollow, a final twist in a story that had already unraveled. In the end, I was left with nothing but the quiet aftermath. Alice was gone, and the museum had closed its doors to her. Roman was broken, both physically and mentally, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life, to move on from the wreckage. But as I stood there, in the empty halls of the museum, I realized something. Revenge, no matter how sweet it seemed at the time, never truly heals the wounds. It only creates more scars. And in the end, all I had was the knowledge that I had removed the infection, but I had also lost a part of myself in the process. In the months that followed, I found myself in a place I never expected to be, a small, rural clinic in the remote wilderness of Montana. It wasn't the life I had planned for myself, not the life I had worked for. But after everything that had happened with Alice and Roman, after the destruction I had left in my wake, I couldn't stay in Savannah any longer. The city, with its familiar streets and memories, felt suffocating. Every corner reminded me of her, of the life we had built, of the lies, the betrayals, and the consequences of my actions. The decision to leave was one born of necessity. I needed to distance myself from the chaos, from the wreckage I had created. And so, I found myself here, in a place where the air was fresh, and the landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. It was as far from my old life as I could get. At first, the work was simple enough. A small clinic, mostly serving local farmers, ranchers, and the occasional traveler passing through. There were no prestigious surgeries here, no high-profile cases. Just regular people with regular problems, broken bones, infections, the occasional sprained ankle. It was a humbling experience, one that reminded me of why I had become a doctor in the first place. The joy of helping others, of making a real difference in people's lives, was something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't care about recognition anymore. I didn't care about being the best, or about the prestige that came with my former life in Savannah. Here, there was only the work, and the people. But despite the peace that surrounded me, despite the simplicity of my new life, there was a part of me that couldn't escape the past. The clinic was quiet, the people friendly, but I was still haunted by what I had done, by the choices I had made. Alice's face would still appear in my dreams, her eyes filled with the pain and confusion of that night at the museum. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I would hear Roman's voice in my head, begging for an explanation, pleading for mercy. But there was no turning back from what I had done. I had cut them both out of my life, just as I had promised. But in doing so, I had also cut away a part of myself, a part that I could never get back. One day, as I was sorting through some old medical records in a drawer, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a letter, folded neatly and tucked away in the back of a file. At first, I didn't recognize it, but as I unfolded the paper, I saw that it was a printout of the fetal heartbeat, the same one I had listened to in the sterile room back in Seattle, the one that had confirmed that Alice's child was not mine. I hadn't destroyed it, not yet. Part of me had wanted to rid myself of the reminder of what had happened, but I couldn't. The heartbeat, that tiny pulse of life, was something I couldn't forget. It was a symbol of everything I had lost, everything I had fought so hard to protect. But at the same time, it was a symbol of my failure, my inability to hold on to the one thing that had truly mattered. I folded the letter back up carefully, tucking it into the drawer where it had been hiding for so long. I knew it would always be there, a silent reminder of the choices I had made, of the path I had taken. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep letting it define me. The world around me was moving forward, and so must I. The letter would stay hidden, locked away in that drawer, and I would move on. I had learned a hard truth in the months since I left Savannah. True betrayal isn't just when your partner's body goes to someone else, when they're unfaithful in the traditional sense. True betrayal is when their soul no longer looks into your eyes, when the love you thought was real has faded into something else. In the end, I had no desire to return to that life, the life I had once known, the life I had once fought so hard to protect. It was gone. And with it, the man I had been before Alice, before Roman, before the lies and the betrayals. That man was lost, buried in the wreckage of the past. But here, in this small clinic, in the quiet expanse of Montana, I found something new. It wasn't the same as before, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had cut out the rot, removed the infection, and though I didn't expect it to heal completely, I had done what I could. The past would always be with me, but I would no longer let it define my future. I would live for today, for the people I helped, for the simple moments that made life worth living. I had learned that sometimes, the hardest part of moving on isn't letting go of the past, it's learning to forgive yourself for what you've done. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to do that.